"You can't bring that through here," Cynthia Bellamy said, flat as ever, one hand parked on the iron gate lever like it was her throne and not just a chunk of rusted steel. She didn't even try to lower her voice, didn't look at the hearse sitting behind me, engine rumbling like it was holding its breath. My wife's coffin was inside, polished cherry wood flashing sharp in the last bite of sunlight. Almost too bright, honestly, for a day like this. Cynthia's smile? All teeth and no warmth. "The board hasn't approved this procession." For a second, I just stared at her, words stuck. This wasn't about lawn flamingos or mailbox paint. She was blocking my wife's funeral. I leaned in, voice low enough to slice concrete. "I designed the security firmware. Every alert still pings my phone. Don't test me, Cynthia." And for just a moment, her mask cracked. The edge slipped, the smugness flickered. That look? That's what kept me standing upright. Because if Cynthia could block a coffin, she could block anything. You know what I mean? That was the line. Right there in the driveway, dignity on one side, disgrace on the other. My wife, Leah, her only request was to be buried under that old oak tree by the lake. The same tree we'd sat beneath during summer storms. The place she wanted our daughter to learn to ride a bike. The place she told me she wasn't scared of dying, as long as she was close to home. And now, the HOA president wanted to make her stand. On this day, of all days. The engine behind me kept humming. I swear, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. Curtains twitched, cameras blinked red. The neighbors watched from behind glass. My daughter was crying in the back seat. Tiny, shaking sobs that made something inside me want to tear down that gate with my bare hands. Cynthia just tilted her head, lips curled. "Board rules exist for a reason, Mr. Mercer. Exceptions create chaos." I didn't even answer. Just glanced up at the security cam. My camera, the one I installed when this place begged me for protection. Every frame was recording. If Cynthia wanted to turn grief into theater, I'd give her an audience. She thought grief made me weak. She thought the rules gave her all the power. She didn't see that my grief was a blade, and it was sharp. "Where are you watching from?" Because standing there, stuck between iron and arrogance, I realized this wasn't just about my wife. This was about every scared neighbor who'd swallowed their voice. And I felt something flicker back to life. Cynthia Bellamy might control the gate, but she'd never seen me pick a lock before. Eventually, Cynthia relented, not out of compassion, but because the eyes from the cul-de-sac started burning holes through her. The hearse rolled forward, slow and deliberate, like every turn of those wheels was a courtroom verdict. When the service ended, silence hung heavier than any prayer. The neighbors didn't come to comfort me. They came to watch, faces pinched, arms folded, waiting, I think, for someone to finally push back. That night, I drove to the community hall. Special board meeting, because Cynthia couldn't let it go. The place smelled like old carpet and fluorescent lights. Parcel maps hung like warnings on the walls. Cynthia in the center, board members on either side, nodding when she nodded, scowling when she scowled. The seats were packed. She started talking. Tonight's session addresses the unauthorized procession. Like she hadn't just blocked a funeral. Her words were clipped, legal, inevitable. Order must be maintained. Someone in the back snorted, "Order, my ass." I didn't wait for the floor. "You tried to stop my wife's funeral. That's not order. That's abuse." Cynthia narrowed her eyes. "This is not the time." "It's exactly the time," I shot back. "It's about every one of us who's been fined, threatened, humiliated. You think people don't notice? They're here because they're tired of watching you grab power." Whispers turned to nods. The air prickled with a kind of electricity. And that's when I saw him, Mark Ellison, the treasurer. His face was pale, forehead beaded, hands folded too tight. Our eyes met, and something passed. Hesitation, guilt, regret. The first crack in her wall. Cynthia banged her gavel. "The board will deliberate in private session." The room didn't quiet. If anything, it bristled. I left before she could clear the hall. Outside, neighbors stepped out into the glow of porch lights, murmuring, clapping my shoulder, nodding. They didn't say much, but their faces said it all. Someone finally had the guts. What Cynthia didn't know was that the whole infrastructure, sensors, logs, cameras, ran on code I'd written. Every fine she issued, every alert she sent, was stamped with my fingerprint, too. The next morning, I hit the gym early. Mark always ran at 6, pounding the treadmill like he could run away from his conscience. I waited, watching him sweat through his shirt, jaw clenched, eyes vacant. When he finished, his hands shook as he toweled off, and when I stepped close, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Cynthia isn't invincible," I murmured. His shoulders tensed, throat bobbing, but he said nothing. That was enough. Sometimes silence is just fear with the volume turned down. As I walked home, I passed Leah's grave under the oak. Fresh dirt, wind in the branches, promise kept. My phone buzzed, a violation notice. Unauthorized funeral. $1,500 fine. I laughed almost. Cynthia had turned my grief into a bill. It wasn't about money, it was about control. I didn't linger by the grave. I drove to my office, a cluttered loft where my servers still hummed. Cynthia might have thought she was in charge, but she couldn't enforce a single rule without my systems. I pulled up the logs. Every override at the gate. First denying the hearse, then locking up, then opening the hall for her meeting. All tied to her credentials. She hadn't just crossed a moral line. She'd left a digital trail. And state law? It's not on her side when it comes to blocking funerals. I started archiving. Backed up everything. I wasn't ready to go public yet, but I wasn't letting any of it disappear. The next day, I went to the cafe, the one place the board didn't control. Cynthia's lieutenants were huddled in the corner, talking low and fast. Mark came in, sat alone, stirring his coffee until it went cold. When someone asked about the fines, he flinched. "It's manageable, as long as no one challenges it." That line was all I needed. Mark wasn't the enemy. He was the witness. That Saturday, I went to the playground, the place where families gathered, where HOA rules were just ink on a sign. I set up my laptop and a portable projector. At first, nobody noticed. Then a few parents drifted over, curious. I started scrolling through the logs, showing Cynthia's digital signature on the gate override. "This is the moment she blocked the hearse," I said. "Here's where she locked it again after being forced to let us through. These aren't rumors, they're records." The crowd thickened. Phones came out, recording. In the back, Mark hovered, half in, half out of the group, jaw tight, eyes wide. I shut the projector before Cynthia's loyalists could warn her. Some neighbors nodded. Others whispered. But the story wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs. That night, a note slid under my door. "Meet me at the maintenance shed." Midnight. Mark stood there, shadows hiding his face, hands shaking as he shoved a USB drive into my palm. I can't cover for her anymore. The fines, the accounts, the way she manipulates the system. You can prove it now. His confession tumbled out, about altered logs, unapproved fines, surveillance, the whole mess. He wasn't frozen anymore. I went straight to the university library, files spread out under flickering desk lamps. The data was clear. Cynthia had blocked the funeral, fined me without board approval, and funneled funds into shadow accounts. I started mapping it all, lining it up with the logs from my own servers. Exposure was risky, but this was no longer a story for board meetings and whisper campaigns. I printed the evidence, stacked it in a folder. Sunday, after church, I asked the pastor for 5 minutes. I projected the logs on a blank wall, held up the folder with Cynthia's handwriting all over it. The room erupted, murmurs, shouts, phones snapping photos. Then Mark stepped forward, voice trembling but honest. "It's all true. I signed off on numbers I knew weren't right because I was scared. But after what she did at Leah's funeral, I can't stay quiet." The crowd surged, defiance, not just whispers. 2 days later, the board called an emergency session at the rec center. Cynthia's email dripped with authority, attendance mandatory, demonstrations not tolerated. But people showed up angry, not afraid. The gym filled to the rafters, neighbors packed in shoulder to shoulder. Cynthia called the meeting to order, but the crowd wasn't having it. "You blocked a coffin," someone yelled. I stood and walked to the mic, folder in hand. "You call this order? You call this community? This is corruption." Phones recorded every word, every log, every page with Cynthia's signature. Cynthia called it slander, tried to shut me down, but I held up the evidence. Mark stood up, voice shaking but clear. I gave him the files. "Cynthia's been issuing fines, hiding records, lying. I was complicit, but I'm done being afraid." The crowd roared, calls for her resignation, demands for answers. Even her board allies started to shift away from her. One of them, Margaret, stood up. "You told us this was standard, but these documents show otherwise." Cynthia's mask slipped. The board began to unravel. phones hovering inches from her face, the community no longer cowed by her rules. Someone shouted, "Apologize for the coffin." The chant picked up, "Apologize, apologize," until the rafters shook. Cynthia's shoulders sagged, and finally she broke. "I'm sorry. I should not have stopped the procession." Cheers, tears, clapping. It wasn't just her words. They were celebrating the end of her reign. Mark caught my eye across the room. He looked lighter, like a weight finally slipped free. Cynthia was finished. Regulators would come. Neighbors would demand elections. Her apology, just the first domino. When I stepped outside, cool night air filling my lungs, I looked back at the glowing gym. I'd kept my promise to Leah. Dignity, vindication, and a truth no one could erase. The neighborhood wasn't fixed yet, but healing had started, right there, with one gate, one coffin, one refusal to bow. If you've ever stared down an HOA tyrant, hit subscribe, drop your own story below, and let's see where you're watching from.